Welcome to Founder Stories. With me today, I have Ilya Sukhar from Parse. Welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Parse.
Yeah, so Parse, the mission is to make it much easier to make mobile apps. So what we do is we provide a set of SDKs for all the major platforms, for iOS, for Android, for Windows Phone, for everything else. And these SDKs let developers focus on just the engaging parts of their user experience, the useful utility, and not worry about all of the table stakes functionality that every app needs out there. So things like data storage, push notifications, server-side logic, integrations with third-party systems, all this stuff that everyone rebuilds over and over again. We take care of all of that so people can focus on the really important parts of their application.
And I can say that I've used the product, and it's fantastic.
Great.
It's really easy to use.
Cool.
So you guys went through YC.
Yep.
Tell us a bit about how the team formed and kind of YC experience, and then fast forward to where we are today.
Yeah. So we've kind of an interesting founding story. So from my end, I was actually working at a YC startup before doing Parse. I was at a company called eTact. And we got acquired by Salesforce in, I think, December of 2010. I knew that I wanted to do my own thing next. And so I applied to YC, left Salesforce, and I spent some time doing my own experiments. I was building mobile apps. I was trying to see what this mobile thing was all about, trying to get into the really hot stuff. And the idea from Parse came out of that. I realized that, A, I'm not great at consumer social apps, but that there was a need for the kind of service that Parse provides. I was a single founder, so I was going into YC and I was spending a lot of time meeting people beforehand to try to find a co-founder. So I met my co-founder Kevin through Paul Graham. Paul Graham kind of plays matchmaker for any of the single founders in the batch. Kevin was also a former YC founder. He had a company called Combinator that was doing Facebook games, and he was looking to do something new. So we teamed up to go into YC with the idea behind Parse. It was not my idea that I applied with, but we got into YC doing that. And then later we met T-Con and James. They were working together as a separate team, working on a different product, and we're looking to pivot. And we teamed up probably a month into YC.
Now, oftentimes when you do, founders are looking for other founders, it's tough to find that right chemistry. I mean, how did you know, like, okay, this is someone that I could go build a company with? Yeah,
I mean, it's definitely scary. I think that, it worked out just fine, but, in retrospect, it was a big risk. The founding relationship is a really deep one, and there's a lot of ups and downs to go through together. I think what we did is we tried working together. And, I won't say that's a perfect solution, but it's the best you can do, is try working together on a sort of a contingency basis for, a week or a month or however long it takes to get comfortable. Ultimately, if it's a stranger, it's going to be a risky proposition. So that's definitely something that worked out well for me, but I would not recommend to other folks.
Yeah, I mean, is there any kind of like special filters that you tried? There's the pair programming, go work on a project, which makes sense, but I mean, presumably there are other things that you probably did just to say, hey, can we go to battle together?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. This is something that I've started to use in just regular interviews anyway. I really judge how people argue with me. So, the founding relationship is sometimes contentious. You have to make strong decisions about, product or hiring or stressful situations that are happening, and you're going to get into arguments. Everyone does. And testing that sort of, how does this person argue with me? Like, what is their style? Do they get, do they get the point across? Do they get angry? Whatever. Just how do they do that? I think that's really useful, and I do that in interviews now. I sometimes kind of say something contentious, or I, maybe say something silly, and I see how someone either challenges me, doesn't challenge me, and if they challenge me, how do they go about it? I think it says a lot about someone.
I like that.
Yeah.
As someone who's done a lot of interviewing, I think that's a fantastic technique.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious though, like what are the counter arguments that you hear that you filter out? Like, is it style or is it the content? Like, what do you? I mean, it makes sense to me to use that as a criteria, but like, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, just in an interview context, I think there's. It's a bad sign when someone doesn't call you on something that is clearly just wrong, not right, or silly. And I think that I personally don't like to hire folks that are afraid to do that. On the other hand, I think that there's various sort of styles of argument. Some folks will, you know, stick to their point and you know, not go through like a sort of a reasoned like discussion with you, or they'll be like very sharp in their reasoning. It's more about the style really than there's honestly like there's no one thing that I bring up with folks. It's kind of a mixed bag.
I like that. So you leave YC. There's 4 of you
Yeah.
at that point.
Yep.
And you go get some seed financing. You did Series A last year. And today you're at what size?
We've got 24 people right now.
And how many engineers?
It's mostly engineers. So counting the founders, 20 out of the 24 are technical.
Now, as the CEO, kind of during that growth, are you still checking in as much code or not as much?
You know, a little bit, but it's hard to keep up. And I think that as much as I like coding and as valuable as I think it is, like there's enough people doing it at the company, and there's many other problems that I could be tackling. Yeah,
especially because you're at I mean, between 20 and 30 is such a huge inflection point for companies where some structure either emerges organically or you put it in place.
Yeah.
And I mean, it takes a lot of discipline to not go do that check-in or fix that piece of code that you wrote 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of learnings have you made from that?
You know, I've just really, you know, I've really trusted, my co-founders as well as the engineers that we've hired to do some of the technical stuff as the team grows, and you know, the sort of CEO job I think is by and large doing whatever part of the company, whatever functional task is really just understaffed and developed. So that's been my focus, and if something gets to a stage where the company's humming and you've got folks doing their jobs, you should probably move on to some extent. So engineering is kind of like the very first thing where that happens. We hire engineers first, and we were engineers ourselves. So it became pretty clear early on, as much as I loved coding, that it was time to start working on sales, start working on business development,
really building the business.
Yeah, really building the business, really figuring out the messaging, doing marketing stuff. It just you hop around and fill the needs.
And as an engineer now, playing the role of CEO, what's been surprises that you've had that you assumed it was going to be one way and it turned out to be a little bit different?
Almost everything, to some extent. One thing that like I said, it's strategy of mine, I don't think it's uncommon, is to fill the roles that are really understaffed. And I always try to do the roles to a deep, sort of significant degree before hiring someone into it. So for a while, I was the primary sales guy at the company. And it's not something that I've done before, and I was surprised at sort of the day-to-day of a salesperson and the mechanics of negotiating large contracts and navigating enterprises, and I guess I'll betray my background, but a lot of it was surprising.
So to the engineers in the audience, like what were some of those surprises?
Oh, well, I think everything takes longer than you think it will. I think that the motivations, that drive buying decisions are not the sorts that engineers typically grasp from the get-go. I think there's lots of dynamics inside of a company. I think just building a product that requires a level of trust. It comes with all sorts of challenges in sort of explaining to big enterprises like this is how you adopt it. This is why you should trust us. Just figuring out the messaging and really iterating. It's kind of like pitching for fundraising. I think that was kind of an interesting analog for me, where you have this idea in your head of how you should pitch your company, but you're going to get iterative feedback every single time from every customer or from every VC, and you kind of have to hone to what's working and what isn't. And this might sort of, to some extent, diverge from your own understanding of the value of the product, which then drives interesting product decisions and interesting marketing decisions and things like that.
And with 20 or so to 24 people engineering, and as you're kind of holding the fort in parts of the company that don't have as much staff, how much effort do you make to kind of educate on the engineering side, like what you're doing, and to like bring back some of these customer sales, right?
Yeah, no, we're very transparent. So we're transparent by design in the sense that all of the engineers do support and talk to customers, and there's really no barrier between that. We have no product managers. it's easier because we have a fairly technical, developer-focused product. But in general, I've been very transparent of things I've learned, and I don't hide the ups and downs. When there's a contract that doesn't come through for some product reason, I think the folks need to know, and I share all of that.
I guess the question is less around transparency versus like explaining maybe what you heard in a particular meeting, because one of the things that can emerge in a company is you have kind of engineering, view sales. They have a perception of what sales is, right or wrong.
Yeah.
And sales can have a perception of engineering.
Yeah.
And now you're in this kind of tweener stage where you don't really have a sales team yet. You've got an engineering team.
Yeah.
I was wondering how much time you're investing in and kind of basically bringing the engineers along your journey as you're learning.
Yeah. I mean, so we do have a sales team now, but we didn't until fairly recently.
Yeah, certainly.
And so, I think the engineers came to some of the meetings and the calls, and I was always, going back and chatting about any given talk I just had with, potential buyer, potential, non-buyer, and giving feedback all the time. And I think that, the engineers always, in some senses, like take it, almost too strongly, because you might miss a contract and it's like, oh, because we didn't have this feature, and it's like, well, it's not enough data to even execute on. So sometimes you have to say, okay, of the 10 folks I talked to today, 3 complained about this, 4 complained about that.
You mentioned that you don't have any product managers.
Yeah.
I mean, do you anticipate getting product managers, or like what is your view?
Yeah, I think that it's TBD. I don't see it in the immediate future. I think that a really core strength of the company is that our engineers are so involved in product decisions. Like when I take feedback from my conversations or from sales conversations and bring it to folks, I bring it to them directly. I'm like, okay, we need more around push analytics. And they get to figure out, what are the features, and, what does the competitive marketplace look like. Obviously I'm helping, and so are my co-founders. But I think it's core strength of the company that the engineers get to do a lot of this work. And I think it works particularly well in our case, because a lot of our customers look like us. They are developers, right? And that's pretty unique. I don't think it works for every company. I feel like a product manager is kind of a translator role, right? They're translating market demands to, to-do items effectively. And in our case, the engineers can do that just as well, if not much better. Because they understand their customer that they're talking to, and just putting them together sometimes is the best way to get something done, right? I'll have a conversation with someone who might buy a big contract, and maybe we're missing some feature. A lot of times I'll just put the two in touch, and they go from there. And obviously I'm checking in and seeing how things go, and managing the relationship. But that can get a product out the door in a higher quality, at least in our field, much better.
No, I agree. I think in many different product companies, having engineers work with customers directly ends up being bidirectionally really good, right?
Yeah.
Customer feels like they're getting a lot of attention, and then the engineer has more empathy for the customer.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh wow, I assumed X, but it turned out to be Y. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you coming on board today here on Founder Stories, and thank you for watching today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.